I'm sure we've all had days like this. It's a really hard day at work. You came home, you got into an argument with your partner. Now 2 a.m., you're sitting there and you're scrolling through Amazon and you need that item. You have to have it. Even though you have 3 sitting right over there, what do? You click buy now. Why do we do that? Because money is not just financial, it's emotional. And that's what we're going to talk about today on the Social Engineer Podcast, the Human Element series. This is episode 316. I'm Chris Hadnagy, CEO of Social Engineer, the Innocent Lives Foundation, and the Institute for Social Engineering. And we've been doing this podcast since way back 2009. As always, if you're interested in human behavior, our Human Behavior Conference is happening in November. You can go to humanbehaviorcon.com. And you can also join us on social-engineer.com. Check out some of our new services. We had a lot of new things, especially with Dr. Abby going on. So you can go check those things out. If you're interested in chatting about SE, our Slack channel is open to anyone who wants to be family friendly and discuss the legal aspects of security. As always, I invite everyone to take a moment to go visit innocentlivesfoundation.org. If you're a parent or a caregiver, we have a lot of information for you on there on how to keep your kids safe online. And if you're interested in our mission, we help law enforcement geolocate people who traffic children and create child abuse material. And we're up over 570 some cases now. So really proud of the work there. And as always, the music is none other than Clutch. We love that band, so we thank them for letting us use the music. Now let's get to the whole reason we're here. I'm super excited about our guest. Our guest is Shang Saavedra. And she's the founder and CEO of Save My Sense, an influential personal finance website and social media platform. Shang teaches readers the key habits and behaviors needed to become less fearful of money and live life with joy. She was named one of the 25 most influential new voices of money by Time Magazine and Next Advisor in 2022. She's an expert reviewer and contributor at CNET Money. She receives her bachelor's degree in economics from Harvard and her MBA from the University of Chicago, both School of Businesses. Shang and her husband finished saving for their retirement by the age of 31. I want to know this secret. And now they live a work optional life in Southern California with their 2 boys and 2 cats. Shang, it is awesome to have you on the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Chris.
So I'm definitely interested in the story, but in the topics that we have. But I always want to ask this question when we start. How did you get to where you are? Like, at what point did you say, I'm going to do this with my life?
I would say perhaps the most influential emotion that I had in my life was feeling bullied as a child. And obviously I couldn't have predicted that, but I'm actually a pretty short person and I'm an immigrant and I moved around and received a lot of different types of bullying all through my childhood. And because I felt like I could not physically fight back, I always had this voice in the back of my mind that went, you showed them, Shang. You're going to do well in school and you're going to make a lot of money and you showed them. Somehow that was like the perfect revenge story in my mind. And I think now I don't access those memories of revenge that much anymore, but that was the initial drive that got me to really be into academics.
That's, it's sad, but also kind of empowering, right? My wife has a similar story. She moved here from Thailand when she was a young girl, and the place that her mom met her husband and they moved to, there was absolutely no Asian people at all where she lived.
Yeah.
So she was bullied in school a lot too. But that gave her such strong stick-to-itiveness character right now. And she's probably one of the strongest women I know on the planet. And she says that, she had to really learn how to defend herself. When she came to the country, didn't even know English. She had to go to school and learn.
Yep. Exactly.
So that's an interesting story. Thank you for sharing that. So let's talk then about your topic, because, you have all these wonderful accolades, how you help. How did you come up with the idea to create this company, Save My Sense?
Yes. So if you're curious, I can talk a little bit about how it coincided with me turning 31 and realizing I didn't have to work the rest of my life. Because of that original drive, that revenge story, I did get to go to a great undergrad at Harvard and then also went on to a fantastic business school at University of Chicago. Both of these experiences allowed me to basically take on careers that were high paying. And I owe a lot of this to my parents because they exhibited very frugal behaviors growing up. We were immigrants. At that time, there just wasn't a lot of money to spend and my parents did not go into debt. And so I learned from them at a very young age, you need to spend less than you make and save and invest the difference, which is crucial because that's not a typical financial education that's passed down from parents to children. And so with my very first paycheck, I began saving and investing. And I did so more and more until it became almost like a game to me to see how much I could save and invest at any given time. I even took on extra jobs. I became a wedding photographer on the side. That was my very first business on the side to add even more income. And it got to the point eventually where my original mission was to get rich. But one of my friends took me aside and I hadn't been publicly sharing this because like living a frugal life at the time was so contradictory to what all of my other friends were doing. I was kind of keeping a little bit of a secret. But one of my friends kind of caught on to it. And he's like, I think you might enjoy reading this blog called Mr. Money Mustache. He was one of the very first bloggers who really popularized the idea of FIRE, which is financial independence, retire early. And he laid out the math for how can you get enough net worth that you don't ever have to work again. You just live off of the growth of your investments. I ran the math and I was like, I'm basically projected to get there by age 31. And so I basically got there at age 31. My husband and I, because early retirement wasn't our goal, we continued working. We wanted to have children. We were a little bit delayed in the dream of doing that. But in the meantime, we do have children now. In the meantime, when I was still working, but now there wasn't like as much of a drive because like we reached that very big goal where, kind of waiting for children to happen. We were traveling around the country and I witnessed, areas of extreme poverty in the United States. Like those areas exist. Not everybody sees them. It was an election year and, the economy was front and center. And I thought, okay, I'm not really into politics. I don't love that stuff, but what can I do to really change people's lives? And I was like, what if you just help people with their finances? Like that's really what matters and can really move the needle for individuals. And I began doing what I knew best, which is just sharing random thoughts to the internet. And that's how Save My Sense was born.
So when your origin story, you said something interesting that made me think of a question. How did you know what to invest in?
I did not.
Doing your investments?
I did not.
Okay.
But I was lucky that in my early 20s, a few nuggets of wisdom came my way. And I owe a lot of this, again, just being in the right room at the right time with the right people, but also just following my interest and hearing those nuggets. My very first exposure to investing was a combination of one middle school teacher and my dad. So my middle school teacher, this was a typewriting class, but she took a 2-week break and just randomly decided to teach all of us how to read a stock chart. I'm not sure why she ever deviated from her curriculum.
Wow.
But that was pretty cool. So middle school Shang knew what a stock was. So conceptually, that was a great start. Then high school, when my parents revealed to me that they did have money saved up for my college tuition. I said, how? My dad told me, well, this is through investing. We didn't save this amount of money. We invested and got there. So I had a glimpse at his portfolio at the time, which was like a couple of stocks and a couple of mutual funds. At that time, index funds were not in vogue just yet. So, okay, I kind of added to my knowledge. I remembered, okay, you can do funds and you can do stocks. Then in college, I was at some presentation by a bunch of Wall Street bankers where female Wall Street bankers, and they said, ladies, invest in what you love. If you shop here, you buy that stock. If you like this product, you buy that stock. So I was like, okay, I'm getting more and more exposure to it. And then starting my first paycheck, I worked for a management consulting company. This is probably the biggest tip of all. We had our onboarding. And in this company, we actually at the time worked on a lot of mergers and acquisitions. So a lawyer came into the room and said, okay, you guys are all working on mergers and acquisitions. You may be privileged to insider information, meaning you cannot trade. Do not get in trouble. And the lawyer basically flat out said, do mutual funds. Don't bother with stock trading. And I think that was a huge saving grace because as I later learned through my own teaching, reading books and stuff and learning about investing, I was like, oh, that probably was the best tip I got, which is by doing mutual funds, I spread out my risk. And so I didn't, ride risks on individual stocks that could have completely, gone the wrong way and caused my entire portfolio to collapse.
So you come up with this concept. You say something really interesting in some of your writing where you say money is emotional. It's not just about logic. Tell me about that. Like, where did you come up with that, and why is that ring so true for you?
I experienced it, but more importantly, I saw it happen over and over again as I began coaching people through Save My Cents. So in the beginning, and Save My Cents, I still do this today. I do coaching. In the beginning, when I first started, I put everybody on a budget that I customized for each client. And I said, okay, we're going to see how much you can save each month. And every month when they do these check-ins, probably half the people didn't do it, or they didn't meet the target, and we're trying to understand why. And I realized that there was no pattern at first, no discernible pattern. In fact, people who are extremely well educated, making above average 6-figure incomes, struggle just as much with money and personal finance concepts as people who were, the opposite. So I was like, okay, this is not an issue of intelligence, because otherwise I would see that correlation. And then I started digging deeper and deeper and deeper until one day I finally made the connection. Wow, this actually has a lot to do with the way that our brains are wired and the health of our brains, our mental health. And that's when I really went into a different angle, which is focusing on our early childhood development, our mental health, depression, anxiety, and any other presence of neurological issues that may be affecting the ability of our brains to be at their best. And that's when I realized, okay, yeah, it's not intelligence. It's this other stuff that people aren't talking about.
That is really, really interesting. So how do you help people so if you realize that you see this pattern, then how do you help people avoid the trap of being emotional about the money?
Well, I work with that by figuring out, well, where did your root causes come from? So everybody has a collection of both good and bad money habits. And I started surveying and understanding the upbringing of my clients. And in my book, I touch on this. I realized there were 3 very, very common root causes that probably explain 90 to 95% of quote unquote bad money behaviors that I see out there. And the root causes, and I'll go explain each one, are feast and famine, adverse events, and scarce immigrant. You can probably relate to 1, 2, or all 3 of these root causes. By the way, they're not meant to be mutually exclusive, but they do explain 3 slightly distinct sets of behaviors. Let's start with feast and famine. Feast and famine is when you grow up as a child in a household where you kind of teeter between when there's money, it gets spent, and then when there's no money, people go into debt. Lots of very impulsive spending, typically a paycheck to paycheck family, low income, although sometimes high income households can also fall into the same trap. And what the children growing up there learn or did not learn from parents is they saw that their parents never planned with their money. And so they too do not have the tools as an adult to plan with their money. And so if you're from feast and famine, you're also very likely to be very impulsive with your money as an adult because you don't know otherwise. Second root cause is adverse events. Some event or a series of events or situations in your childhood led you to relate to money as a means to control you. So this is typically what happens when parents make money or love conditional to their children. So a feast and famine parent would throw a birthday party because they got the money and they'll throw the birthday party. They love their kids. But an adverse event parent would only throw that birthday party if they felt that their child was deserving of it. And that deserving could be, they want their child to look a certain way, to do well in sports, do well in school, behave a certain way. I mean, it's pretty abusive, to be honest. If you grew up in adverse events, you grew up with the thought that you're not worthy unless you reach some external measurement set by an authority figure in your life. And so as an adult, what you may often engage in is actually what I call identity seeking money behavior, where you put your money and your time is where you're trying to define yourself, to make yourself prove to your parents that you're worthy. And I see this either people spending a lot on their parents, people spending a lot on luxury goods to feel good. They could actually be spending a lot on career, or spending too much time in their careers. And in the worst of scenarios, I might see this happening, resulting in substance abuse. I have a coach clients who, came out of substance abuse or alcoholism, episodes. And then finally, scarce immigrant. Typically you're the child of immigrants who left everything they knew behind, their home, their culture, their village, their family to get established, here in the United States or a well-to-do Western country. And when your parents take the biggest risk of their lives for their children's sake, they don't want you to take the same risk. And so growing up, you're often going to hear from these parents, do well in school, get a good job, make a lot of money. Don't take the risk mom and dad did. Don't start a business and buy real estate and gold. They're, stable. And so oftentimes what I find with scarce immigrant, people with that background, they do relatively well. I mean, they did go to a good school, they get into good jobs, they make decent money, but they are risk avoidant. They avoid, taking that extra step to uplift their career. They may be actually really great entrepreneurs, but they don't want to become an entrepreneur. That was actually me. I'm naturally more an entrepreneur than I am a corporate hamster, but because of the training my parents gave me, I thought I needed to be in corporate life for the rest of my life. And then also investing wise, risk avoidance. So I see much more emphasis on real estate, which I'm not saying that's a bad asset class, but people in this root cause often think the stock market is like a trap or it's gambling or it's not real. And that's an interesting illusion that I have to help people with.
That's some fascinating laying those out for those three different risk or adverse things that you have seen. And I'm assuming because you identified yourself as that last one, but you also got really good advice from your parents, even though maybe not to start your own company, but it seems like your dad taught you to invest and taught you to, make sure you live below your means.
Yeah.
So how did that affect your understanding of like how you spend your money? Like how when you growing up and you started actually investing and saving, you had a spending cycle, I assume. So how did all of those things affect you in your spending cycle?
Yeah. I realized that when I had good mental health, I was very rational with my money decision making. And then when I had poor mental health, then I struggled a lot more. And so, I do think it's fantastic that we do have a movement across the United States now to make personal finance education more accessible and even mandatory in some states to high school students. And that was the education that I received from my dad. But the ability to actually execute successfully once you're given the information actually relies a lot on your mind being healthy enough so that you can engage the parts of your brain that are needed to do well in personal finance. And that's typically in the prefrontal cortex, which doesn't fully develop for many people until their mid-20s. And so that is also why it's very common for us to see people in their early 20s still struggle a lot with the very basics of personal finance, because I was like, well, they actually literally don't have the brain power to fully grasp it. And so to quickly explain, when you think about personal finance and so-called good money behaviors, you need advanced planning. You need rational, non-emotional thinking. You do need some math. I mean, it's not fancy math. I call it basically high school math at best, but you need math. And also the ability to just like analytically, strategically think ahead. These are executive functioning skills that require a healthy prefrontal cortex. Whenever we are under duress mentally, and this could range from being exhausted, being stressed out, going through heartbreak, breakups, grieving, health issues, you name it. Our brains are less capable of engaging that prefrontal cortex. And then we kind of retreat more to our more emotional, more survival states. And that's when our brains don't execute against these, these fantastic personal finance education that you might have received. And
Mm-hmm.
so thankfully, I think one of the most important things that I did, no matter how healthy or unhealthy I felt, was that I realized if I spend, and at that time I was working 70 to 90 hours a week, if I spend so many hours a week trying to make money, shouldn't I be spending some time each week learning how to keep that money? I was like, if you put so much effort into making money, you also need to put some effort into keeping it. Mm-hmm. And so I actually started a habit where I dedicated an hour a week to working on my personal finances. Sometimes it's running a bank errand. Sometimes it's reading a book. Sometimes it's balancing my, budget and all of that. But it just became that habit. And I credit a lot of that with just normalizing to my adult self that personal finance is an adulting skill. It's an adulting chore. That it's not something that just like naturally happens. You do actually have to work at it in order to get better at it.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So you make a statement in your writings that you say you're more than your net worth. Now, a lot of people, I would imagine, feel that how much money they have or don't have really does define them. Like if you're in debt and you can't seem to get out of it, that might define you as, oh, I feel like I'm a loser. Or some people might equate their winning with having millions of dollars or more. So what is, talk a little bit about you're more than your net worth phrase that you use.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about media, if you think about what we see online, in the news, in movies, basically media has defined for us that we should care about somebody's net worth. We should care about how much money somebody makes. And then it should show in the way they look or the way they live their lifestyles. I mean, there's a reason why the Kardashian show is so fascinating to people because they just offered this very raw, scripted look at a very wealthy family. Whether it is right or not, I don't know. But I come from a background, and I'm also Christian, where the fundamental belief is you have value as a human being, regardless of what you achieve in life. Like if we were to rate and rank everybody by their net worth and their salary, that's actually pretty demeaning in my mind. Like that really takes the humanity out of life. And in the past, I have seen, other writers perhaps perpetuate an incorrect belief that, oh, if you have debt, you did something bad. There's something wrong with you. How can you not figure out? By having done all this coaching with my clients, I'm like, gosh, if you actually dig into the why and into these stories of how perhaps not so ideal financial situations came about, you too would be a lot more gentle in the way that you talk about money as well. So it's just from my background, but also from literally knowing why people get into debt and how oftentimes it's not due to irresponsible behavior. And I'm like, no, we're not going to use the money itself as a definition. It's a part of our lives and we have to manage it, but it doesn't weigh on whether I think you're a good or a bad person. And I think that should be empowering because it gives everybody the hope that they're great. It brings back the importance of self-love into this whole equation.
Which probably helps with the emotional state that some people might be going through that they attach to their money, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I say some of the people I've learned the most from in my life have not been wealthy people. They have not been very wealthy. And I've had some great mentors that they would not be considered high in the status on the wealth scale, but I still learned so much from them, in my life and career. Which kind of brings me to a few questions I always ask when we're finishing up. Since the beginning of this podcast, I've asked every guest the same question, and we have a book list now on our website that has hundreds of books. It doesn't have to be, of course, we're going to put your book in our list too. It doesn't even have to be about our topic. It can be about anything. But have you read any books that you were like, everyone should read this book?
I think I quote this book very early on in my book, but it is one of the most influential books I've ever read, which is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Duhigg. Just a really great book that scientifically and also anecdotally explains how our brains form habits that are very difficult to undo as adults, which has a lot to do with personal finance as well.
That is great. I don't think we've ever had that suggestion. So that will be a brand new one. And,
Great.
And then I'm sure you've had many people in your life that have helped you get to where you are today, but do you name any people that you would consider some of the top mentors that you wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for them?
I have to credit my therapist in New York City.
Oh, I love this.
She's very shy. She doesn't want her name known, but she knows who she is. But in the years that I've worked with her, just really helped me heal from so many limiting beliefs that I had and unresolved issues from my childhood that were really holding me back personally, career-wise, financially even. So I really am grateful to her.
Another very unique answer. I don't think I've ever had someone say they're a therapist, so that's great. So if she's listening to this, congratulations to you for having that shout out. That's really awesome. And lastly, if people want to follow you, know more about your work, maybe get you to coach them, what's the best way for them to communicate with you?
I'm most active on Instagram and YouTube under my company name, Save My Sense, all one word. But you can also check out savemysense.com. There's links to everything that I offer there. I'm very open. I try to get back to every message as I still humanly can. And I welcome all of your feedback and suggestions.
Thank you. And for everyone listening, we'll put in the show notes all of the website, Instagram, YouTube, Goodreads, Amazon, all the different links that we have so you can stay connected with Shang. Okay, last but not least, if you had just one ending piece of advice for anyone listening, what would it be?
It's also the ending sentence in my book, but I truly believe in it. It is, do it scared, but do it anyway.
I love it. That is great. That is great. That's going to be the title of this podcast. I love it. Thank you so much for coming on, Shang. This was a really fascinating conversation.
Thank you so much, Chris.
And thank you all for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something this month. A really, really fascinating topic. And next month, we're going to be joined by linguistics specialist Lauren Gaughan. So till then, stay safe. See ya.